The conclusions of determinism are so stunningly obvious that it's hard for people to accept that. There's a lot of fight when it comes to the concept of free will. People get very emotionally attached and invested in the idea that they and they alone are responsible for their actions. But it's a very murky path. You might, think about how you're responsible for your accomplishments. And I think that's where people go. I am the master of, myself, of my future, my destiny. But it gets very tricky very fast. You might imagine that Thomas Edison would not be Thomas Edison except for living in the age in which he lived. If he had lived too early, there wouldn't have been the necessary ingredients for him to discover or invent all of the things that he did. And if he lived too late, people would have already done that, and then someone else would be Thomas Edison. It's a lot like the sort of illusion of wealth that some people have, that the idea is to protect those who have wealth because you yourself might someday be wealthy and then it would apply to you. And it's this fantasy, this illusion that if I was wealthy, this is how I would feel. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense from your perspective, from a societal perspective, because in the end there is a bit of tug of war. And if you're not in the 1%, sure, you might not want to scare them all off or be crazily hostile to their interests, but to accede to their interest when it conflicts with your own doesn't make a lot of sense either, unless it is through that fantasy that, well, they worked really hard to get to where they were. And we have to respect how hard people work to get to where they are. Maybe one day I, too, will work that hard and be one of those people. It's the American dream of working your way to the top. Well, except it doesn't really happen that way very often. And most of the time, you work your way pretty much to where you started. That when you started in a middle-class family, you end in a middle-class family. When you started in poverty, you end in poverty. And there certainly are cases where people are able to transcend that by a little, for the most part. Someone from a poor family goes to get a college education, works really hard to graduate at the top of their class, and then get a prestigious profession, a lawyer or a doctor, in which they can now live comfortably in the upper middle class. And that sort of social mobility does, of course, happen, but it's far from the norm. The norm is that we pretty much tend to stay to end where we began. So we have this illusion that says, well, it's important to venerate Thomas Jefferson, or venerate Thomas Edison, or venerate all of these either thought leaders or inventors or famous and important people, because they were the ones to create and to make what happened in their lives occur. When you look at all of these cases, they could only have occurred if they had been born in that particular circumstance, if they had been born at that specific time. If Thomas Jefferson were born today, he certainly wouldn't be around for, his fame of creating the Declaration of Independence. If Thomas Edison were around today. Now, I'm not saying that people aren't going to accomplish important things, but these people that we look to are, in these examples, are very much a product of their circumstances. And then when we look at our own lives, we don't see the same, we're oblivious to the same concern. That our own lives are only possible because we live in an age of internet. We live in an age of blogging. How would I do a vlog on YouTube without YouTube? But if this were 20 years ago, I don't think I'd have much luck. So everything has conspired to allow me to do what I'm doing right now, and my entire life is completely dependent upon all of the circumstances that support it. So then, when it comes to free will, it's a strange idea that just by force of will I can make these things happen. So again, by force of will, Thomas Edison could not invent the light bulb. In fact, without his workshop of other people who probably didn't get any credit for it, he could not have invented the light bulb. We have this, and it's common throughout history, that success breeds success. That being in a successful position allows you to be more successful. Having money allows you to make more money. So what part of that was free will? Maybe it's in some kind of a more granular, do I want, and this is the examples you get, do I want the chocolate muffin or the strawberry muffin? And that is your extension of free will, to be able to choose these things. And were your choices down to such a granular level completely predetermined? But the answer to that is also yes. Why are you in that cupcake shop to begin with? Who are you with? How old are you? How did you come to that point? Some people don't like chocolate. And did they choose to not like chocolate? Some people don't like strawberry. Is that a choice as well? No. You come with it. You say, this is not something that my taste buds respond to. No one chooses their likes. If you like football and you force someone to explain why they like football, well, they didn't say, well, one day I decided I should like football. One day I decided that blue was going to be my favorite color. I didn't have a favorite, to start with, but I thought about it and I thought I should have a favorite color, and blue looks like a really good one to start with. A lot of people's favorite color are blue. In fact, I Googled what the predominant favorite color was and decided that whatever the top of the list was my favorite. Of course, if that were even true, as absurd as it is, then you would be the kind of person who would Google someone else's the most favorite color and then choose that as your favorite color. That's not something you would choose either, as it's very exceptional. So what is this mythical free will? What exactly are you doing that you are making a choice of that isn't impacted by the circumstances of your birth or life, that isn't impacted by people around you? Your choices aren't constrained by your biology, by your gender, by your height, weight, by your health, by your skin color, ethnicity. All of these things that you came with, are what is going to determine all of these preferences. You might be the person who grew up in a cold climate and hates cold weather, understandably, because you grew up in the cold climate. Had you grown up in a warm climate, you might hate that. So everything is about a myriad, an uncountable mass of conditions that you have no control over, and it's absolutely impossible to separate out even the smallest decision, even the strawberry versus chocolate cupcake, or no cupcake at all, from all of the things that have affected you throughout your life. We are, for better or worse, a sum of our experience. We are part biology, part history. So where exactly does free will fit into that? It's sort of like that 1% thing. Well, a little free will, so you can sprinkle a little bit on. Yeah, sure, maybe it's not all free will, but it's not all determinism either. But that's a hard argument to make, because where does one end and the other begin? And how does having a little bit of free will in the process, at what level is that significant? And at how can it even exist that you only have a little? Isn't it sort of a sort of a modal choice, an or choice, one or the other? How do you have a little of both? Well, I'm influenced a little bit by this or that. And people, they mount really serious defenses trying to defend free will. It's really a very emotional process. People are very invested because it means that if I don't have control of myself, that somehow I'm a puppet, somehow my life is not my own. And, there isn't really a way to distinguish the illusion of free will from actually having it. I'm not really sure how that could happen, how you would be able to tell the difference. If all you have is the illusion of free will, but your actions are actually predetermined, even though you think they're not, then how is that different from just having free will? In your perspective, you would never be able to tell the difference. So the fact that you don't have free will isn't constraining. It isn't, it shouldn't make you sad, because you don't know and will never know whether it's true or not. Determinism's something that's so obvious because, for example, you get into physics and they say, well, this thing is probable, so probability comes into it. And this thing is somewhat random, like we can measure the same exact thing in the same exact way more than once and come up with different results. So therefore, it is probable as opposed to causal. But that's not really a true reading of that. Even physicists, Einstein, whoever, admit that, well, there is an alternative explanation for all that, and that is that we simply don't know all of the factors that make things what they are, that they appear probable to us. But that's because we can't measure the other factors impacting these things. Are they truly random? Are they truly... And then, even if you accept that they're random, even if you accept that they're probable as opposed to causal, then once they have been measured, once all of these things exist, that doesn't change. It's not like you go back to the reading and now it's a different reading. The thing that you did 10 minutes ago, between 10 minutes and now, has changed. So once you've observed something, once you've seen it, measured it, written it down, that's never ever going to change. So the idea that probability somehow evades determinism, that if we live in a probable universe where random things occur, that it cannot therefore be deterministic. So with the idea in mind that determinism is about predicting. So if we knew all of the factors in the universe that go into making something the way it is, then it would say that, well, if it's all laid out, then it's all causal. That from beginning to end, the universe is just one cause after the next in a very complicated sequence, which is true. And, the idea of probability is missing the concept that there is more that we don't know than that we do know. And there is actually a computer smart enough, big enough, and calculated enough to predict the future. And had you that machine, you could do that. You could absolutely sit there and predict everything that's going to happen from now until infinity. And that machine's called the universe. And that's what it is. It is a giant sequence. And if you knew every single piece of data in the universe, then you would have the universe. That would be the universe. It's not possible to know all of that without also being it, which then could mean we're in a hologram, could mean we're in a computer simulation. That's possible. It would be very hard for us to tell. But in the end, you cannot actually get to probability without knowing absolutely everything that exists in the universe, which we can never do. So it always is a theory. It's always possible that things are random. You don't know that they're random. And as I said, even Einstein talked about hidden variables, things that might be affecting it, but you just have no idea. So probability is not the savior of free will. And why are you trying to save it anyway? What's the value or the point of saving free will? Well, it's our own self-importance, that it's important for us to be in control. when, yeah, we're really not. And it's, I think, hard for any person to sit and point at an aspect of their life that they're totally in control over. Are you in control over your time? Well, if you have a job, you're not. And you say, oh, well, I could quit my job, I could do all of these things. But you're not going to do those things because you want to eat. Like, your life isn't about making arbitrary choices. You can't just flip a switch and say, well, today I'm going to be a completely different person just because I, want to exercise my free will. But there's kind of a message in determinism, which is, as rude as it might sound, get over yourself. It's okay if you are not in control. It's okay if the forces that control your life are far beyond your control. That's all right. And it's reality. It's, it's a bit strange when you think about all of the people in all of these bad situations, whether they be in prison, in a war, dying of starvation, and we apply free will to say, well, what you have the choice of what? Eating grass or eating worms? And that's free will? That's quote unquote freedom? This is what freedom looks like? No, freedom looks like the fact that when good things go our way, we get to take credit for it and say, yeah, that was me. Ha. But what about all those other people who are in terrible situations, who have been in terrible situations throughout their entire lives, who, died horrible deaths? Was that an exercise of their free will? Free will is a convenient way to feel better about yourself, because the idea of not being in charge of your life is scary. The idea that other people and other factors and other things are making your choices for you and you don't actually have any real choices is scary. And it's scary for a number of reasons, because it's scary to think about other people really not having control over their actions, not being able, because ultimately there's a lot of self-protection here to say that, well, I can make choices that protect myself. I can avoid those people that I'm dealing with that are harmful. I can avoid them, or they can have the free will not to harm me. There's a bit of this social contract. And yet we have a jail full of people. So it doesn't seem to work that way. In fact, it's really difficult, I think, to square the concept of free will with reality in any way, because it requires you to believe that people make terrible choices that are absolutely against their own interests. It requires you to believe that people are responsible for the things in their life, with North Koreans going and eating grass, that they're responsible for that. That somehow is an extension of their free will, that we all have this responsibility for our destiny. So to couch it, because that's such an absurd thought, we then try to introduce this half measure to say, well, it's a little bit. Sure, yeah, okay, so we aren't in control of whether we're born in North Korea or not, but we're in control of that cupcake. Strawberry or chocolate, I can control that. I make the choice. And when I look at the minutia of my daily life, these are my choices. I chose to do this. And again, it goes back to a desire for protection, a desire to protect yourself from inevitability, from the inevitability of your own death, your own mortality, and that may not go well. You could be in a horrible car accident, burn alive. Everyone alive has that possibility. Someone, rich or poor. I mean, you can just look at examples of very wealthy people that did not meet good ends. Kobe Bryant dying with his daughter certainly springs to mind. So, what was the free will in that equation? Well, the free will was, questioning the helicopter pilot, or the helicopter pilot making a decision about the fog, all of these things in any kind of choice capacity to say that they are in any way responsible for the way that ended is absolutely horrible. It's horrendous to think about people being responsible for those things. And even when you move on to murderers, serial killers, that they are truly responsible for that they truly have contemplating all the ways their life could have gone. Well, I could have been an athlete. I could have been a money manager. I could have done all of these things with my life. And what did I choose to do instead? Well, I chose to hunt people down and bury them next to a creek. What? So we go to these extremes, and then it becomes pretty obvious. Okay, well, no, we're talking about mental illness, but that doesn't apply to the rest of us. The rest of us are, fully in control when we, burn to death in a helicopter. We make these choices, and sure, we can't control the outcomes of them, but so, what does it really mean? What does free will actually give you? And I would suggest that it gives you a lot of heartache, because it creates this perception that you are responsible for both the good and bad things in your life. And the nature of choice is competition. So when I make a choice, when I, do something great. So for every, Thomas Edison, for example, for every Thomas Edison that's going to be out there, there's going to be someone whose idea was stolen. For every person for whom you make a choice, if I make a choice to accept a promotion at work, well, there's someone who didn't get that promotion. If I make a choice to go after a job and somehow I land the interview, due to my fantastic interviewing skills, or just the fact that, the person liked my hair, or lack thereof. And I make that choice, I take that job, well, that takes it away from someone else. Someone else would have gotten that job. So these choices are inherently competing. And that's what free will gets you to, is, in addition to, I would suggest, many other problems with the concept, it gets you to this world of competition where we all fight each other for resources, where we all compete for these different things. And maybe not all the time, maybe some of these choices are mutually beneficial, but there is an element of inevitability that choice is between people. The choice, like the choice to start a war, is going to be at the cost of someone else. Whereas if there is no choice, and if all of this is far beyond our control, and we can, get over ourselves and realize that there's no way for us to control any of this, that we don't need to. I mean, if there is a universe out there and that universe has a design, and somehow it has me doing this or that, who am I to sit there and say, no, I've got a better idea? Unless it's important for me to be important. And I think it's somewhere in there. It's somewhere in the desire to protect yourself, or the desire to have control, or the desire to be important, that the sort of mythical benefit of free will exists. And just like how we chase after the lottery, or how we imagine ourselves in a fantasy world, free will is that fantasy. It's a fantasy that we can change our destiny. And people get real stubborn about having those kinds of fantasies taken away from them. But what is free will really about? What's the purpose of it? What's the point of it? What does it mean, and why does it even need to be there? Because the world is a lot easier to understand and accept without it.